Sometimes the greatest Christmas surprise isn't the gift waiting under the tree. It's the truth someone spent years trying to forget. Snow drifted gently beyond the towering windows of the Montgomery estate, turning the sprawling grounds into a postcard scene that looked almost too perfect to be real. Thousands of warm white lights wrapped around the trees lining the circular driveway, their glow reflecting across the fresh blanket of snow that stretched for acres beyond the property. Inside, the annual Montgomery Christmas Gala was already in full swing. Crystal chandeliers scattered golden light across polished marble floors. A string quartet played softly near the grand staircase while guests in tailored suits and elegant gowns mingled beneath towering wreaths trimmed with red velvet ribbons. The scent of pine, cinnamon, and fresh-baked desserts floated through the air, blending with the quiet hum of conversation. At the center of it all stood Ethan Montgomery. At 41, the billionaire CEO of Montgomery Capital looked exactly like the man magazines love to place on their covers. Tall, composed, confident, dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, he carried himself with the effortless authority of someone accustomed to walking into any room and owning it. Yet tonight, even Ethan felt the weight of expectations settling across his shoulders. This evening wasn't about acquisitions, board meetings, or billion-dollar deals. Tonight was personal. Tonight, he was introducing Victoria Sinclair to the entire Montgomery family. Victoria stood beside him near the enormous Christmas tree that reached nearly 20 feet toward the ceiling. Her emerald green gown shimmered beneath the lights as guests smiled approvingly whenever they passed. She looked exactly like the woman everyone expected Ethan Montgomery to marry. Beautiful, sophisticated, connected. The daughter of one of the most influential families in New York. Every detail fit together so perfectly it felt almost scripted. Across the room, Ethan's father, Richard Montgomery, laughed as he exchanged stories with longtime business associates. His mother, Eleanor, moved gracefully among guests, making certain every detail remained flawless. Even Ethan's younger sister Sophia seemed unusually pleased with the evening's atmosphere. For once, the family appeared united. For once, there were no scandals, no tensions, no unexpected complications. As Ethan looked around the room, he could almost believe life had finally settled into the future everyone expected him to have. Victoria slipped her hand through his arm and smiled. "Your family seems happy tonight." Ethan glanced toward his parents. "That's because they think they know exactly what happens next." Victoria laughed softly. "And do they?" Before Ethan could answer, a server passed carrying a tray of champagne while guests gradually drifted toward the center of the ballroom. The moment was approaching. In only a few minutes, Richard Montgomery would formally present a treasured family heirloom, a diamond ring passed through generations, symbolizing the future leadership of the family legacy. Cameras from invited society publications quietly positioned themselves for photographs. Guests exchanged excited whispers. Everything was unfolding exactly according to plan. Then something strange happened. Near the entrance hall, one of the household staff suddenly stopped walking. A second employee turned toward the front doors. Then a third. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable beneath the music and conversation. But within seconds, a ripple of confusion began moving through the room. Several guests looked toward the entrance. Conversation slowed. The violinists exchanged uncertain glances but continued playing. Ethan noticed the shift immediately. His instincts sharpened. Years of leading companies had taught him to recognize when the atmosphere in a room changed. He followed everyone's gaze toward the massive front doors at the far end of the hall. The doors had just begun to open. Cold winter air slipped inside. Snowflakes danced briefly through the golden light. And for reasons he couldn't explain, a strange feeling settled deep inside his chest. As if Christmas itself had arrived carrying something far more dangerous than a gift. The ballroom fell into a silence so complete that even the music seemed distant. One by one, conversations faded as every eye turned toward the entrance. Richard Montgomery lowered his champagne glass. Eleanor stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. Sophia glanced toward the doors with visible curiosity. Ethan remained still beside Victoria, his attention fixed on the widening gap between the massive oak doors. The cold December air drifted across the polished marble floor before a figure appeared beneath the glow of the entryway lights. It was a woman. She stood calmly just inside the doorway, a long charcoal coat dusted with snowflakes, her dark curls resting neatly against her shoulders. She did not appear nervous. She did not appear impressed by the wealth surrounding her. Instead, she stood with the quiet confidence of someone who had already made peace with whatever came next. Behind her, 3 small figures stepped into the warmth of the mansion. The children looked to be around 7 years old. Matching winter coats covered their small frames. One wore a red scarf, another a green one, and the third carried a small gift box wrapped in silver paper. For a moment, nobody moved. The children stared wide-eyed at the enormous Christmas tree towering above the ballroom. Their faces reflected the wonder any child might feel seeing something so grand during the holidays. Then one of them smiled. A simple smile. A harmless smile. Yet something about it caused Richard Montgomery's expression to tighten. Ethan noticed it too. He could not explain why. The child looked familiar. Not because he recognized the boy, but because the smile carried an unsettling resemblance to someone he had seen every day of his life. Victoria shifted beside him. "Do you know her?" she asked quietly. Ethan did not answer immediately. His pulse had begun to quicken. The woman removed her gloves slowly, revealing steady hands. Her eyes scanned the room before settling briefly on Ethan. No anger appeared there. No bitterness. No accusation. Just recognition. The kind that comes from shared history. Across the ballroom, whispers began moving through the guests. Society reporters exchanged glances. Several members of the Montgomery family looked between Ethan and the woman, sensing an invisible connection they could not yet explain. Then Richard stepped forward. "May I help you?" he asked politely. The woman offered a respectful smile. "Good evening, Mr. Montgomery." Her voice was calm and warm. "My name is Nia Brooks." Ethan felt the world narrow around him. Victoria looked up sharply. Sophia's eyes widened. Eleanor inhaled softly. Years had passed since Ethan had heard that name spoken aloud. Years since he had convinced himself that chapter of his life belonged entirely to the past. Yet hearing it now felt like opening a door he had locked long ago. Nia glanced down at the children. "Come on," she said gently. "Remember your manners." The 3 children nodded immediately. Their behavior was remarkably polite. One by one they stepped forward. The little girl clutched her silver gift carefully while the boys stood beside her. Then the smallest boy looked up at the enormous Christmas tree glowing beneath thousands of lights. "Mom," he whispered softly, unaware that the room had become completely silent. "Is this the place you used to tell us about?" Every sound in the ballroom disappeared. Nia's expression softened. "Yes," she answered quietly. "This is the place." The silence lingered for several long seconds after the boy spoke. It was not the uncomfortable silence of strangers meeting for the first time. It was something heavier, something that seemed to settle over the ballroom like fresh snow. Nia rested a gentle hand on the child's shoulder and offered him a small smile. The little girl beside him tightened her grip on the silver gift box while the third child stared up at the enormous Christmas tree, completely unaware of the tension surrounding them. Richard Montgomery studied the children carefully. Years of leading businesses had sharpened his instincts, but tonight it was not logic guiding his attention. It was recognition. The oldest boy tilted his head slightly while looking around the room. The gesture was subtle, almost impossible to notice. Yet Richard had seen that exact mannerism before. Ethan used to do the same thing as a child whenever he entered an unfamiliar room. Across the ballroom, Eleanor noticed it too. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her champagne glass. Sophia glanced between her brother and the children, her curiosity growing with every passing second. Victoria remained beside Ethan, though her smile had disappeared. She looked at Nia, then at the children, then back at Ethan. "You know her," she said quietly. This time it was not a question. Ethan swallowed. "A long time ago." Victoria's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "How long?" Before Ethan could answer, Nia stepped forward. "I apologize for arriving without an invitation," she said politely. "Especially tonight." Richard's voice remained measured. "You seem to know this family." Nia nodded once. "I knew Ethan many years ago." Several guests exchanged glances. The society reporters positioned near the back of the ballroom immediately became interested. Ethan noticed and felt irritation rise inside him. This evening had been carefully planned. Every detail had been controlled. Yet somehow the past had walked through the front door carrying 3 children and shattered the certainty of the night. The little girl suddenly looked up at Nia. "Mom, can we give them the present now?" she asked. Her voice was sweet and innocent. Nia smiled softly. "In a minute, sweetheart." Richard's eyes moved toward the gift box. "You brought us a Christmas present?" The children nodded together. "Mom said Christmas is about kindness," one of the boys answered. "Even when people have not seen each other in a long time." The response drew an unexpected reaction from Eleanor. Her expression softened. Something about the children's manners felt genuine. There was no sign of entitlement, no rehearsed performance, only sincerity. Then the second boy stepped slightly forward. As he did, a photograph slipped from the pocket of his coat and drifted to the marble floor. Nobody reacted immediately. The child bent down to pick it up, but Sophia reached it first. "I got it," she said with a smile. She lifted the photograph and glanced at it. The smile vanished. Her eyes widened. Slowly, she turned the image toward herself again as if she could not believe what she was seeing. "Ethan," she whispered. Every person near her looked over. Ethan stepped forward and took the photograph from her hand. The moment his eyes landed on the image, the air seemed to leave his lungs. It was an old picture, more than a decade old. A younger version of himself stood beneath autumn trees with his arm around Nia. Both of them were smiling at the camera. Both of them looked happy. And written across the bottom in faded ink were 4 simple words. "Forever starts with us." The photograph seemed to weigh far more than a piece of paper should. Ethan stared at it without speaking. Around him, the ballroom remained frozen beneath the glow of Christmas lights and crystal chandeliers. The string quartet had stopped playing entirely now. Even the musicians appeared captivated by whatever invisible story had suddenly unfolded in the middle of the Montgomery Christmas Gala. Victoria looked at the photograph and then at Ethan. The answer she found in his face unsettled her more than any explanation could have. "You kept this?" she asked quietly. Ethan barely heard her. His eyes remained fixed on the faded image. He remembered that afternoon. He remembered the autumn leaves drifting across a university campus. He remembered believing that life would be simpler than it turned out to be. Most of all, he remembered the woman standing beside him in the picture. Nia watched him carefully, but offered no explanation, no defense, no emotional appeal. She simply stood beside the children with the same calm dignity she had carried through the front door. Richard finally broke the silence. "Perhaps we should all sit down." His voice carried enough authority to move the room back into motion. Guests slowly returned to their tables, though their attention never left the unexpected visitors. Society reporters lowered their cameras after receiving a discreet warning glance from Montgomery security. Richard was many things, but he was not about to allow a family matter to become tomorrow's headline. "Please," Eleanor said gently, stepping toward Nia. "You and the children must be freezing." Nia smiled politely. "Thank you." The children followed Eleanor toward a seating area near the enormous Christmas tree. The little girl carefully carried the silver gift box while the boys stared at the decorations with growing excitement. "Mom," one of them whispered, pointing upward. "Look at the star." Nia followed his gaze. A brilliant golden star crowned the top of the tree nearly 20 feet above the ballroom floor. Her expression softened. "It is beautiful, isn't it?" The boy nodded enthusiastically. Ethan noticed something strange then. The child's smile looked familiar. Not because it resembled the photograph. Not because of the old memories. It was something deeper. A small crease formed near the corner of the boy's eyes whenever he smiled. Ethan had seen that exact expression every morning in his own mirror for years. He looked away immediately. His heartbeat had begun to feel unsteady. Across the room, Sophia was studying the children with increasing fascination. "What are their names?" she asked. "Noah, Nathan, and Naomi," Nia answered. The children looked up when their names were spoken. "Triplets?" Sophia asked. Nia nodded. "Yes." A brief silence followed. Richard leaned back in his chair, observing everything. The names, the ages, the photograph, the reactions. Pieces of a puzzle were slowly arranging themselves in his mind, though he resisted jumping to conclusions. Then Naomi suddenly remembered the gift she had been carrying. Her face brightened. "Mom, can we give it now?" Nia hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Naomi walked directly toward Richard and held out the silver box with both hands. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Montgomery." Richard accepted it with visible surprise. "For me?" Naomi smiled. For your family. Richard slowly opened the lid. Inside rested a simple handmade Christmas ornament shaped like a family tree. Delicate names had been written along the branches in careful handwriting. Richard's eyes settled on the final branch at the bottom. For the first time that evening, the color drained slightly from his face. Because written there, in small silver letters, was a single surname. Montgomery. For several seconds Richard said nothing. The ornament rested in his hands beneath the glow of the Christmas tree while the entire family watched his reaction. Naomi stood patiently in front of him, her small hands folded together, completely unaware of the shock moving through the room. Richard looked down at the silver letters again. Montgomery. The name seemed impossible and yet strangely inevitable. Slowly, he lifted his eyes toward Nia. She remained calm. There was no triumph in her expression, no attempt to force a conclusion. She simply waited. Victoria was the first to speak. What exactly is this supposed to mean? Her voice remained polite, but the strain beneath it was impossible to miss. Naomi immediately looked concerned. Did we do something wrong? She asked softly. Nia stepped forward and placed a reassuring hand on her daughter's shoulder. No, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong. Richard carefully closed the ornament box and smiled gently at Naomi. It is a beautiful gift. Relief spread across the little girl's face. Mom helped us make it. Eleanor glanced toward Nia. You made this together? Nia nodded. Every Christmas we create something by hand. The children like family traditions. The word family lingered in the air. Ethan heard it. So did everyone else. Across the ballroom, guests attempted to hide their curiosity, but even they could sense the invisible tension pulling tighter with every passing minute. Ethan finally stepped forward. Nia. His voice sounded lower than usual. Why are you here? The question was simple. The answer did not come immediately. Nia met his gaze. For a brief moment the noise of the ballroom seemed to disappear again. Years of unanswered questions stood between them. Years neither of them had expected to revisit tonight. I came because Christmas matters to them, she said softly. And because some things should not stay buried forever. Victoria crossed her arms. That is not an answer. Nia turned toward her politely. You are right. It is not. The response was respectful, yet it somehow left Victoria with nothing to argue against. Meanwhile, Noah had wandered closer to the enormous fireplace, where family photographs decorated the mantel. His eyes moved across decades of Montgomery history captured in silver frames. Then he stopped. Mom, he called. Look. Everyone turned. Noah pointed toward a photograph of Ethan as a teenager standing beside Richard and Eleanor during a Christmas celebration many years earlier. The boy tilted his head. That is weird. Sophia walked over. What is weird? Noah pointed directly at Ethan's younger face. He looks like Nathan. Silence returned instantly. Nathan glanced up at the photograph, then at Ethan, then back at the photograph. A little, he admitted. Especially the eyes. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. Victoria's face lost more color. Eleanor looked at Richard. Richard looked at the children. None of them said what everyone was beginning to think. Then Nathan smiled awkwardly and rubbed the back of his neck. It was an unconscious habit. A tiny gesture. Yet Eleanor's hand flew lightly to her chest. Ethan did that exact thing whenever he felt uncomfortable. He had done it since childhood. The realization struck her so suddenly she could barely breathe. Nia noticed the reaction. Her expression saddened slightly. Not because a secret was being exposed. Because she knew the moment she had spent years preparing for had finally begun. The atmosphere inside the ballroom changed in a way that no amount of holiday music could repair. Nobody had spoken the obvious truth aloud, yet it seemed to hover above every table, every decoration, every strand of golden light wrapped around the towering Christmas tree. Richard Montgomery remained seated, his eyes quietly following the children as they explored the room with innocent curiosity. He had spent decades evaluating people, negotiating billion-dollar deals, and recognizing patterns before anyone else noticed them. Tonight, however, the evidence was not hidden inside financial reports. It was laughing beside the fireplace. It was studying old family photographs. It was standing only a few feet away. Noah had wandered toward a table filled with Christmas cookies prepared for the guests. Mom says gingerbread is the best one, he announced proudly. Eleanor smiled despite the tension. Your mother is correct. Noah grinned and selected a cookie. The expression that followed was so remarkably similar to Ethan's childhood smile that Eleanor had to look away for a moment. Across the room, Victoria noticed every reaction. She noticed the way Richard watched the boys. She noticed Eleanor's growing affection. Most of all, she noticed Ethan. He had barely taken his eyes off the children since they arrived. "This is getting out of hand," Victoria said quietly. Ethan looked at her. "What is?" "Everyone is acting like there is already a conclusion." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Nobody has said anything. They do not need to." Her voice remained controlled, but the strain underneath was becoming harder to hide. Nearby, Sophia sat beside Naomi, helping her hang a small handmade ornament on a lower branch of the enormous tree. "Did you really make all of these yourself?" Sophia asked. Naomi nodded enthusiastically. "Mom helped us after school." "You have a very talented mother." Naomi smiled proudly. "She can do almost everything." Nia heard the exchange and lowered her eyes briefly. She had spent years building a life from very little. Long hours, sacrifices, endless responsibility. Yet hearing her daughter speak with such certainty touched something deep inside her heart. Richard noticed that expression. It was not the look of a woman seeking money or status. It was the look of a mother. The distinction mattered. Finally, Ethan approached Nia. The distance between them felt larger than the ballroom itself. "You still have not answered my question," he said quietly. Nia met his gaze. "Which question?" "Why tonight?" For the first time all evening, a shadow crossed her expression. She glanced toward the children before answering. "Because time matters more than people realize." Ethan frowned. "What does that mean?" Nia hesitated. The answer seemed to catch in her throat. "It means some truths become harder to carry every year." Before Ethan could press further, Nathan suddenly appeared beside them, holding a framed photograph he had removed from a nearby display. "Excuse me, sir," he said politely. Ethan looked down. "Yes." Nathan pointed at the picture. It showed Ethan at about 12 years old standing beside Richard during a Christmas ski trip in Colorado. The boy studied the image carefully before looking back at Ethan. "Has anyone ever told you that we kind of look alike?" The room fell silent once again. This time, even the children sensed something had changed. The question hung in the air with a weight no one could ignore. Nathan stood there holding the framed photograph, completely unaware that every adult in the room had stopped breathing for a moment. His expression held only innocent curiosity. He was not making an accusation. He was not asking for an explanation. He was simply stating what he saw. Ethan looked down at the boy and felt an unfamiliar tightness settle in his chest. The resemblance had become impossible to dismiss. Not because of one feature. Not because of a single coincidence. It was the collection of small details. The eyes. The posture. The way Nathan tilted his head while waiting for an answer. Richard slowly rose from his chair. His movements were calm, but inside his mind questions were multiplying faster than he could organize them. Decades of experience told him to rely on facts, not assumptions. Yet tonight facts seemed to be forming on their own. "That is enough excitement for one evening," Eleanor said gently, trying to ease the tension. "Why do we not all sit down and enjoy dinner?" The suggestion offered everyone a temporary escape. Guests welcomed it immediately. Conversations resumed in cautious whispers as people moved toward the dining area. The children followed Eleanor without hesitation. Noah became fascinated by the elaborate Christmas centerpiece stretching nearly 20 feet down the center of the table. Naomi admired the candlelight reflecting across crystal glasses. Nathan carefully returned the framed photograph to its place before joining his brother and sister. Nia watched them with quiet pride. Ethan watched them too. Across from him, Victoria noticed. Every glance felt like another crack appearing in the perfect future she had imagined. As everyone settled into their seats, Richard remained unusually thoughtful. He observed how naturally the children interacted with the family. There was no nervousness, no attempt to impress anyone. They behaved as if kindness was simply normal. Then, something else caught his attention. Before sitting down, Noah automatically pulled out Naomi's chair for her. The gesture was small but instinctive. Richard remembered teaching Ethan that same habit when he was barely older than the children. The memory struck him unexpectedly. During dinner, conversations moved cautiously around safer subjects. Christmas traditions, travel plans, business updates. Yet beneath every word lingered the same unspoken question. Finally, Sophia turned toward Nia. "You said Christmas matters to them. Why?" Nia looked at the children before answering. "Because it has always been the one day of the year when they ask the hardest questions." The table grew quiet again. What kind of questions? Sophia asked softly. Nia hesitated. Questions about family. Questions about where they come from. Questions every child eventually asks. Ethan lowered his eyes. A heavy silence followed. Then Naomi reached into her pocket and removed a folded piece of paper decorated with childish drawings of stars and snowflakes. Mom, she said, can I show them? Nia froze for the briefest moment. Show us what? Eleanor asked kindly. Naomi unfolded the paper and slid it across the table. It was a letter written in careful handwriting. At the top, beneath a hand-drawn Christmas tree, was a simple title. Dear Grandpa Richard. The room became perfectly silent once more. Richard stared at the folded letter as though it might answer every question that had appeared over the course of the evening. Around the table, nobody moved. The candlelight flickered softly against crystal glasses while Christmas music drifted faintly from hidden speakers somewhere beyond the dining room. Naomi looked from face to face, confused by the sudden silence. Did I do something wrong again? She asked quietly. No, Richard said immediately. His voice softened in a way few people had ever heard. Not at all. He carefully picked up the letter. The paper was decorated with small drawings of stars, snowflakes, and a crooked Christmas tree colored in green crayon. The kind of decorations only a child would create. For a moment, Richard simply looked at it. Then he unfolded the page. The handwriting was neat, but unmistakably young. Dear Grandpa Richard, my name is Naomi. Mom says Christmas is about family. I do not know you yet, but Mom says you love Christmas. I hope you are kind. I hope you like cookies because Noah and Nathan eat too many. I hope maybe one day we can all meet. Merry Christmas. Love, Naomi. When Richard finished reading, nobody spoke. The simplicity of the letter somehow carried more weight than any accusation ever could. There were no demands, no requests for money, no hidden agenda. Just a child hoping to meet someone she believed might be family. Eleanor dabbed lightly at the corner of one eye. Sophia looked down at her plate. Even several guests seated farther away appeared visibly affected. Victoria remained silent, though her expression had tightened considerably. Ethan could not stop looking at the letter. Every carefully written word seemed to settle somewhere deep inside him. Nia lowered her gaze. She wrote it last year, she said quietly. Richard looked up. Last year? Nia nodded. The children have asked questions for a long time. Noah shifted in his chair. Because everybody else has grandparents. Nathan nodded. And cousins. Naomi looked embarrassed. Mom always answered our questions. Nia smiled gently at them. I tried. Richard studied her face carefully. There was exhaustion there. Not physical exhaustion. The kind that comes from carrying a burden alone for years. Then something unexpected happened. Nathan reached for a bread roll from the basket in the center of the table. As he did, he accidentally knocked his water glass sideways. The glass tipped, but before anyone could react, Ethan caught it effortlessly. Nice save, Noah said. Nathan laughed. Mom says I am clumsy. Ethan smiled despite himself. I used to knock over glasses all the time. Nathan grinned. Really? All the time? Richard froze. Eleanor noticed immediately. There was something almost unsettling about how naturally the conversation had unfolded. Not forced. Not awkward. Natural. As if two people who had never met somehow shared the same habits, the same instincts, the same rhythm. Then Noah suddenly looked toward a large portrait, hanging above the fireplace. It showed Richard, Eleanor, Ethan, and Sophia during a Christmas celebration from years earlier. Mom, he asked softly, is that the picture? Nia's expression changed. Just slightly. Enough for Ethan to notice. What picture? He asked. Noah looked at him innocently. The one Mom keeps in the box. The room fell silent once again. The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Every face at the table turned toward Nia. Even the children seemed to realize they had wandered into territory their mother had never intended to discuss so openly. Noah looked between Ethan and Nia, suddenly uncertain whether he had said something wrong. Nia remained silent for a moment. The Christmas lights reflected softly in her eyes as she searched for the right words. The box contains memories, she finally said. Nothing more. Ethan studied her carefully. Memories of what? Nia looked toward the portrait above the fireplace. A different life. The answer only deepened the mystery. Richard folded his hands together and leaned back in his chair. He could feel the evening moving toward something inevitable. Every conversation seemed to uncover another piece of a story nobody in the room fully understood. Yet one detail continued to stand out. Nia never once asked for anything. Not money, not recognition, not sympathy. She simply answered questions when they came. Victoria noticed it too, though it did little to ease her growing discomfort. In fact, it made the situation harder to dismiss. If Nia had arrived demanding attention, the explanation would have been simple. But she had arrived carrying gifts. Her children had brought handmade ornaments and letters. Nothing about the evening matched the confrontation Victoria had expected. Then Sophia spoke softly. "What kind of memories are in the box?" Noah brightened immediately. "There are photographs." Nathan nodded. "And Christmas cards." Naomi smiled. "And a ticket stub from Mom's first date." Nia closed her eyes briefly as if wishing the floor would open beneath her. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Victoria turned sharply toward him. "First date." Nobody answered. The children, unaware of the tension, continued innocently. "Mom keeps everything," Noah explained. "She says some things matter even when time passes." Nathan pointed toward Ethan. "I think there is a picture of you in there too." Silence swept across the room again. Ethan looked at Nia. "You kept photographs of me?" Before she could answer, Naomi spoke. "Of course she did." The little girl looked genuinely confused by the question. "You were important." The words were simple, honest, completely free of calculation. Yet they struck Ethan harder than any accusation could have. Nia lowered her gaze. Children see things differently. Richard watched her carefully. Years of experience told him that people often revealed themselves through what they protected. Nia had protected those memories for years. Not displayed them, not weaponized them, protected them. That distinction mattered. Then Eleanor noticed something unusual. Hanging around Naomi's neck was a small silver locket she had not seen before. "That is a beautiful necklace," she said gently. Naomi touched it proudly. "Mom gave it to me. May I see it?" Naomi nodded and opened the locket. Inside were two tiny photographs. One showed Nia holding the triplets when they were babies. The second photograph was older, much older. Eleanor's breath caught. It showed a young Ethan standing beside Nia beneath a snowfall many Christmases ago. Eleanor slowly lifted her eyes toward her son. Across the table, Richard noticed it too. And for the first time that evening, neither of them could pretend the connections were merely coincidence. The discovery changed something inside the room. Until that moment, people had been able to tell themselves there might still be another explanation. A coincidence, a misunderstanding, a connection that looked larger than it truly was. But the photograph inside Naomi's locket quietly erased many of those possibilities. Eleanor carefully handed the necklace back to the little girl. Her fingers trembled slightly. Naomi smiled and snapped the locket closed before tucking it safely beneath her dress. "Mom says family memories should stay close to your heart," she said. No one knew how to respond. Richard slowly stood and walked toward the fireplace. The portrait above the mantel suddenly seemed different now. For years it had represented certainty, legacy, tradition. Tonight it felt incomplete. Ethan remained seated, his gaze fixed on the children. Every passing minute seemed to uncover another reflection of himself. Not a perfect reflection, something deeper. Fragments of familiar habits, familiar expressions, familiar instincts. Victoria finally broke the silence. "I think we need clarity." Her voice was calm but firm. "Everyone keeps speaking around the same subject without actually saying it." Nia met her gaze. Perhaps because some conversations deserve care. Victoria folded her hands together. And perhaps because some conversations have already gone on too long without answers. The tension returned immediately. Noah sensed it and glanced toward his mother. Nia offered him a reassuring smile. "Everything is fine." Richard turned from the fireplace. "No," he said quietly. "Everything is not fine." The room fell silent. Richard rarely spoke emotionally. When he did, people listened. He looked at Nia. "For years, did you carry this alone?" Nia hesitated. "The children were never a burden." "That was not my question." Nia lowered her eyes briefly. "Yes." The single word struck harder than anyone expected. Eleanor looked away, visibly affected. Sophia stared at the tablecloth. Even Ethan seemed unable to speak. Richard nodded slowly. "And you never contacted us?" "No, why?" Nia took a deep breath. For the first time all evening, genuine sadness appeared in her eyes. "Because I believed I was respecting a choice that had already been made." Ethan looked up immediately. What choice? Nia met his gaze. The years between them suddenly felt visible. The day you disappeared from my life. The words settled heavily over the room. Ethan frowned. I did not disappear. Nia looked genuinely surprised by the response. You believe that. I know that. The certainty in his voice startled everyone, including himself. Nia stared at him for several seconds. Then she slowly shook her head. That is impossible. Richard exchanged a glance with Eleanor. Something had shifted. This was no longer simply a story about children. It was becoming clear that two people had spent years living with completely different versions of the same ending. Then Nathan reached into his coat pocket. Mom, he said innocently. Do you mean the letter? Nia froze. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. What letter? Nathan pulled out a folded envelope that looked old from years of handling. The one you keep in the box. The entire room went silent once again as every eye settled on the envelope resting in the child's hand. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Nathan stood in the middle of the dining room holding the worn envelope while dozens of Christmas lights reflected softly across its creased surface. It looked ordinary, a simple piece of paper. Yet the way Nia's expression changed told everyone it carried extraordinary weight. Nathan, she said gently, give that to me. The boy hesitated. But this is the letter. His innocent voice echoed through the silence. Ethan rose slowly from his chair. His eyes never left the envelope. What letter? Nathan looked between the adults, confused by the tension. The one Mom always reads when she gets sad. Nia closed her eyes briefly. The room somehow became even quieter. Richard exchanged a glance with Eleanor. Victoria sat completely still. Sophia leaned forward slightly, unable to look away. Ethan took a step closer. Nia. His voice was softer now. What is in that envelope? For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she extended her hand toward Nathan. The boy immediately gave it to her. Nia held the envelope carefully, as though it contained something fragile. Something that had survived years she never expected to revisit. I never planned for anyone to see this, she admitted quietly. Ethan stared at the envelope. Did I write it? Nia looked up sharply. Genuine surprise crossed her face. You really do not know. The statement sent a chill through the room. Ethan frowned. Know what? Nia swallowed slowly. The last message I ever received from you. Richard's expression hardened. Eleanor covered her mouth. Victoria's eyes widened. Ethan looked genuinely stunned. I never sent a last message. Nia stared at him. You did. No, the certainty in his voice was immediate. I did not. The two of them stood frozen, separated by years of misunderstanding neither had known existed. Finally, Richard spoke. Read it. Nia looked toward him. Mr. Montgomery, please. His voice carried both authority and concern. Whatever happened all those years ago, we cannot keep guessing. Nia looked down at the envelope. Her fingers trembled slightly for the first time all evening. Then she opened it. The paper inside had yellowed with age. Carefully, she unfolded it. Her eyes moved across familiar words she had memorized years ago. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. Nia, I am sorry. My family will never accept us. There is no future for us together. Please do not contact me again. I think it is best if we both move on. The room seemed to stop. Ethan's face drained of color. What? Nia continued reading. You deserve someone who can give you the life you want. That person is not me. Goodbye. Silence crashed over the table. Ethan stared at her in disbelief. I never wrote that. Nia's hand lowered slowly. What? I never wrote that letter. The conviction in his voice was absolute. Not uncertain. Not defensive. Absolute. Richard looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Nia. And for the first time that evening, a far more dangerous possibility emerged. If Nia had spent 7 years believing the letter was real, and Ethan had never written it, then someone else had. The realization spread through the room like a sudden winter wind. Nobody spoke. Nobody seemed capable of speaking. Richard stood motionless beside the fireplace while Eleanor remained seated, her eyes fixed on the letter resting in Nia's hands. Ethan felt as though the ground beneath everything he believed had shifted. For years he had accepted the ending of a relationship he never truly understood. He had convinced himself that Nia had chosen to leave. Nia had spent those same years believing he had rejected her. Both of them had built entire lives around a lie. When did you receive it? Richard finally asked. Nia looked down at the faded paper. 3 days after Ethan left for London. Ethan. shook his head immediately. I never sent this. I know what I received, Nia replied quietly. And I know how it felt. There was no anger in her voice. That was what made it harder to hear. Years earlier, anger would have faded. What remained now was sorrow. Ethan took a slow breath. I called you. Nia stared at him. What? For weeks. His voice grew stronger. I called your apartment. I emailed you. I even went back to campus when I returned. Confusion spread across Nia's face. I never received anything. The silence that followed felt even heavier than before. Richard looked from Ethan to Nia and slowly began putting the pieces together. Someone intercepted both sides. Eleanor looked up sharply. You think this was deliberate? Richard's expression darkened. I do. Across the table, Victoria remained unusually quiet. Sophia noticed and studied her carefully. Meanwhile, the children listened without fully understanding. Noah looked toward Nathan. Nathan looked toward Naomi. The grown-ups were discussing events from long before they were born, yet somehow those events seemed connected to everything happening now. Mom, Naomi asked softly, does this mean you were friends? Nia smiled sadly. A long time ago. Ethan lowered his eyes. The answer hurt more than it should have. Friends. After everything they once planned together, that was all she could call him now. Richard turned toward Nia. Why come here tonight? Nia looked at the children. This time she did not avoid the question. Because I recently learned something. Everyone waited. Something about one of the children. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Nia hesitated before continuing. 3 months ago, Naomi began experiencing a recurring health issue. Nothing life-threatening. But her doctor asked questions about family medical history. The room grew still. I realized I could not answer them. Nia's voice softened. I knew the children deserved the truth. Not money. Not a name. The truth. Eleanor reached for Naomi's hand. The little girl smiled warmly. Richard looked at the 3 children sitting beneath the glow of Christmas lights and understood something profound. Nia had not come seeking a place in the Montgomery family. She had come because the children deserved answers. Then Richard made a decision. Tomorrow morning, he said calmly, we will learn the truth once and for all. Every eye turned toward him. No assumptions. No rumors. No guesses. He looked directly at Ethan and then at the children. Only facts. And for the first time all evening, nobody argued. The decision brought a strange calm to the room. Not because the questions had been answered, but because everyone finally knew they were moving toward answers instead of away from them. Outside, snow continued falling across the Montgomery estate, covering the grounds in a blanket of white that reflected the glow from thousands of Christmas lights. Inside, dinner slowly resumed, though nothing felt ordinary anymore. The conversations became quieter, more thoughtful. The children, however, seemed relieved. Whatever tension had existed among the adults remained invisible to them for the most part. Noah became fascinated by a miniature train circling beneath the enormous Christmas tree. Nathan challenged Sophia to a game involving Christmas trivia cards he discovered near the fireplace. Naomi sat beside Eleanor, proudly explaining how she and her brothers had decorated cookies the previous weekend. Their laughter drifted through the ballroom like music. Ethan found himself watching them constantly. 7 years. The number echoed inside his mind. 7 Christmas mornings. 7 birthdays. 7 years of first days of school, scraped knees, bedtime stories, family traditions, and milestones he had never witnessed. If Richard was right, if the truth pointed where it seemed to be pointing, then an entire chapter of life had unfolded without him even knowing it existed. The realization was almost impossible to process. Across the room, Nia stood near one of the tall windows overlooking the snow-covered gardens. For the first time that evening, she appeared tired. Not physically, emotionally. Ethan approached slowly. Neither spoke for several moments. They simply watched the snow fall beyond the glass. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. If I had known, Nia looked down. I know. He swallowed hard. I would have come. Nia closed her eyes briefly. I know. The answer carried no accusation. Somehow that made it even harder to hear. Ethan looked toward the children. Naomi was laughing at something Eleanor had said. Noah was carefully adjusting the train tracks. Nathan was explaining a complicated game rule to Sophia with absolute confidence. They seem happy, Ethan said softly. Nia smiled. They are. You did that. Nia remained quiet. You raised them. For the first time all evening, Genuine emotion appeared in Ethan's voice. Alone. Nia stared out at the snow. Not alone. Ethan looked confused. She nodded toward the children. We had each other. The simple truth of the statement settled between them. Across the ballroom, Richard watched the exchange from a distance. Eleanor joined him quietly. What are you thinking? She asked. Richard looked at the children beneath the Christmas lights. I am thinking that sometimes the most important things in life arrive when we least expect them. Eleanor followed his gaze. A smile touched her lips. And sometimes they arrive carrying handmade ornaments. Richard laughed softly. Midnight approached. Guests gradually began leaving. The gala that had started as a celebration of one future had transformed into something entirely different. Something nobody could have planned. As the clock neared 12, Naomi walked to the Christmas tree and looked up at the shining star above it. Mom, she whispered. This turned out to be the best Christmas ever. Nia looked at her daughter and felt tears threaten for the first time that evening. Nearby, Ethan heard the words too. And for the first time in many years, he found himself hoping that the next Christmas might include a place for all of them.